Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. This is episode 15, it looks like. And
Mhm.
so today we're just gonna maybe go over some of the data that I've collected and processed, and we'll talk about next steps, maybe some things about what to make of it, but then where we're going from here. Is there anything else we need to cover today, or?
I think that's it. Maybe even you mentioned too, even thinking about a possible working title or focal point for a first um, publication possibility out of this.
Yeah, since this first one's going to be focusing largely on this and other data, but as we looked at from the kind of project arc, we're sort of starting by looking at this data and then potentially moving outward to a product that would require IRB approval, because we'd be ostensibly getting information from Turkers once we sort of have some uh, coherent patterns that we can pull from this data. We can then turn to the Turkers themselves. That would require IRB approval, and then potentially a broader theoretical piece that looks at mechanical Turk and other things as facets of a cultural technique.
Yeah.
All right, so let me share my screen here. And this data should be,
Do a drum roll.
if you like,
Yeah.
needs must. Um, so this data should be shared on the project page here, under resources, data and supporting resources. And just to sort of clarify this, so we've got the notes, we've got the sample here, which is, let me just hide this really quickly. Hide floating, there we go. So this stuff is the actual collected data itself. Let me see if I can pull that up. Public, yeah. I'll make sure I use that one because that's the one that's anonymized. Yeah. So this is, the collected stuff itself, and you can see it's broken into the collection intervals, I guess, down
Hmm.
here. So that's what that stuff is. We've got the A sample and then the B sample, and I haven't really even looked at the B sample yet, in part because it's going to be examining some different stuff. So now we've got A sample collected, processed. So I mean, the language here starts to get a little ambiguous, but the idea here is this is the information on this sheet collected and then processed with frequency measures. So this is what that looks like. And you can see it's basically 6 pages because it's got unigrams, bigrams, and trigrams. And then, as we talked about for the past couple of weeks, and this was kind of a
Yeah.
main thing from last episode, was this issue of weighting, right? So just to recap that, we can see on this first sample, right, we've got the title, we've got the description, and then some other variables like duration and reward. Big 0 for that one. But then this column was the one that started to become salient, the available hits, right? So what this is that this is just an individual posting, or it was, but postings can have different numbers of available hits. And that means how many of those do they want done. So for this particular posting, they want, over 50,000. And that could be remaining rather than total, but you get the idea, is that
Yeah.
they want this many of this done. And in a lot of cases, but this varies from post to post, whether you as an individual Turker can do more than one, right?
Okay.
So it could be the
Right.
case that for this job, you can do as many as you can do, but it could be the case that you can do one and then they don't want your perspective on this. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about that, and unfortunately, it's a little tricky to try and capture this data, but it's possible that there are differences there in terms of type of job. So for example, you know, if it's like this one where it's saying identify the input or identify and input the duration, distance, and calorie values from a gym workout console, it's possible they don't care if you do thousands because they just want the data entry, right?
Right.
But if you're doing like a psych survey,
Yeah, then they most, yeah.
then probably they're going to say one per Turker, right?
Yeah.
But that's variable because we had a question about precisely that. I mean, as if you as a Turker, you know, because you're just seeing these job posts, and if you can only do one of each, then that's what you're encountering. But that's not always the case. It could be the case that you could do more of those. But this kind of illuminated a schism in terms of characterizing this data from the Turkers' perspective. You know, there's an argument to be made that treating these all individually makes sense,
Right.
because this is what you're seeing, right? But from a different perspective, say for example, Mechanical Turk itself,
Yeah.
there's an argument to be made. These tasks right here are the bulk of what's on it right now, right? Because they have so many more available hits, they just far outstrip all these others. I mean, if you go down here, you have a lot that are just one, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of analyzing the textual data, you can make a case for either. You should either just treat these equivalently, or no, these should be weighted a lot more. And so we were kind of wrestling with that.
Because that would be, because I mean, there might be down where some of the available hits are one, there might be some interesting language there, right, that we could use in a later piece to talk about how, right, like our larger question of the cultural technique that's at work here and how it's parsing the difference between human and non-human, but there's only one of them.
Yeah.
And so it's potentially not representative.
Yeah.
Whereas the system itself, or the technique itself, includes the number of that. If we're looking at the size of this thing and how that thing itself, then the number of available hits, right, that weighting that number seems, I think what we were getting at last time is from the Turkers' perspective, these are all one.
Yep.
Right.
But from the system's perspective,
and which may be what we're more interested in.
Yeah. So the good news is we have both. I mean, that's the good takeaway. But you can make, and I think this is something we can discuss in the piece, right? I mean, it's not like we necessarily have to pick one. Or even if we do, we want to point out what we're doing and why, right? Because you can make a case for treating these as sort of a flat, right? I mean, all of these get equal representation. You can also make a case for, no, this should be a lot more valuable. So the good news is here, this is what this does, right? So unigrams, this is treating them flat. And you can see like survey, because when we're talking unigrams, we're talking one word. These are stemmed. So, you know, you'll see minute rather than minutes or minute, right?
Yeah.
Complete, same kind of thing. But, you know, survey appears in all of the data 12,088 times, right?
Yeah.
And so in terms of unigrams, so, and these are stemmed, so it's not the case that we only have, what is it here? 6736 unique words. That's not exactly the case because these are stems.
Yeah.
So, you know, some of those unique words get folded into one stem. But we've got this many unigrams, right? This is in all of that data. You stem those words. This is how many we've got. And so what's interesting is that means it's going to be exactly the same when you look at the weighted data where those are represented, where all of those jobs are. What's basically going on there is this one that has 50,000. It's basically just when I process this data, the way I set it up, because I remember last time we were like, oh gosh, how are we going to do this? It actually turned out to be very easy. It was basically one simple line of code that said in R, for each job, multiply your row by this number and then subtract one, because it was essentially adding them.
Yeah.
And so if you had one that was 1 and you said duplicate yourself this many times, it would give it 2. So you had to then subtract 1. I mean, that's just a quirk of the thing is, if it said 10 available hits, it's telling it, okay, duplicate yourself 10 times, then subtract 1, because otherwise the total would be 11 rather than 10.
Okay.
But the point is, it was very simple to do. But what it does is now, when those are weighted by available hits, our top unigram is shop.
Huh.
But it appears, what is this, 143? That's 100,000. Yeah. So that's 140,000 times.
No, isn't that 1,435,000?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, you're right. That's a million times. That's 7 digits. 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7. I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah. And you'll notice it shifted to shop.
Yeah.
Here, let's see, where is shop? It's 28.
Wow. Yeah.
Now survey, which is our top one there, when it's weighted, it just bumps down to 5.
Still up there. Yeah. It's no slouch.
And so this is precisely the kind of thing we want to look at. And as we'll see in a second, there is a sort of larger question of, like, where is shop coming from? Because it's illuminating that the difference, because this is treating them flat and shop is pretty far down.
Yeah.
Now, when you weight them, shop pops up. So that should tell us something like, well, so shop is appearing in ones that have a lot of available hits.
Yeah.
Now, as we'll see in a second, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I actually broke this down into the sample periods a little bit further, because that could then tell us, well, does shop appear in ones that have a lot of available hits, or is it just appearing in one that has a ton of hits, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it could be, one of these where, like, what if shop appears in this one and it just happens, one interval.
Has a million available.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there are any that go up. I think the highest was in the 60,000s, but the good news is we have that available to trace that out. Now, ultimately, we'll then want to make something of it. Why should we care, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the data itself does not tell us, right? I mean, the data shows you things like where patterns could be. Well, actually, we find
Right.
where patterns are, but it doesn't explain that for you. That's our job, right? So kind of our next step is going to be taking a look at this information, seeing where there are coherent patterns, and making hay out of that, either, identifying what's causing that or what the implications of that are, right? Either going one direction or the other, right? What's
Right.
causing this and why that's meaningful, or what this is going to mean and why that's meaningful.
Here's a quick question.
Yeah.
Given when we were, I mean, there's maybe no way to solve this. Is it because we wouldn't? I guess what I'm saying is we wouldn't be able to know, but oh, that's a good shot.
I was just checking to see if there were any comments.
We collect, so when is this, what's the time frame we collect? This is right up until, I mean, a short story. We collected this more or less between Thanksgiving and Christmas.
No, let's see. It was.
Oh, no, I'm seeing, no, actually.
So July.
Okay.
July.
It's been coming in recently. Okay.
Yeah, so the collection period was July to November, to October.
Okay.
So about 3 months. In fact, let me see. Yeah, it was about almost exactly 3 months.
I was wondering, the stray saw it and then I didn't think it through, was whether or not shop was showing up a lot because it's Christmas.
Well, and see, this is part of it, because as I'll point out here in a second, when you look at the let me see. It's not a unigram, or no, it should be here in the unigrams though. So here, Hurricane Harvey.
Yeah.
And it shows up in the bigrams because it's always together. So, and this is one of the possible patterns here, is these things do have these kind of event linked. So yeah, potentially shop because of the shopping period. certainly something like Hurricane Harvey. And
Yeah.
as we'll see, let me go back to the bigrams here.
What would those tasks be? Were they insurance, or, I mean,
We can look them up. We just have to go to the original data, but
yeah,
we're jumping a little bit, but
sure.
you
I'm
can
just,
see, for example, because what's provided here is the raw frequencies, the rank. So, where that ranks, and that's not equivalent to just numbers because they can tie, and some of them do,
okay.
particularly when you start getting into the lower numbers.
Yeah.
Then it's got the dock frequency, which is super interesting. So, for example, and you can see my screen, Hurricane Harvey, its rank is 7 in the bigrams. Let's see, unweighted. Weighted, I don't think it's nearly as high. Yeah, it's way down for weighted.
Yeah.
But so for the flat bigrams, but notice, look at its dock frequency. So this is the number of posts in which it appears. And
It's
you
much
can
lower compared to everybody else. Well, not much, but lower.
Yeah, compared to its quintile here. And all of these you can sort by. I added these all together so that you can sort by this. So, what's the raw frequency versus what's the dock frequency, which gives us distribution. And you can see this is anomalous, right? Because its dock frequency is very low compared to its term frequency, which suggests there's only a handful of, posts in which it appears comparatively. And that tells us something about, these things that are event linked. I'm not sure what that sound means. That are event linked can be very frequent, but appear in a limited number of docks.
Right.
There's also TF-IDF here, which is essentially a measure of these two things, right? The frequency, TF is term frequency, IDF is inverse document frequency. As we've talked about before, what this helps do is surface things that are important, but appear in few documents. In fact, this is probably one of the reasons, like if you look at its TF-IDF, notice that it's actually pretty high.
Yeah, it looks like it might. Can you sort that?
Yeah, you can sort any of these. So like if we
it
did
might be
sort,
like probably up there.
No, they're much higher. Oh, and the reason why is these are getting multiplied by, the ones that have 1 as a dock frequency, they tend to pop up high, because the way that it works is inverse document frequency goes from 0 to 1.
Okay.
And so it's just a multiplication. It's just multiplying essentially. In fact, one of the things I had to leave this in, but one of the things you can do is if you have a filter that cuts out, that essentially only allows things that are in, say, 10 or greater documents.
Okay.
It cuts out this tail, but I couldn't really do that because they're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Let me slide this over. Just cut those out. So if we did that and filtered by, 10 or 20 or whatever docs, then you can start to see things that are useful there. Let me find, where does hurricane appear? Whoops, got to spell it right. Hurricane Dorian, which was less. There it is. So yeah, you can see it's gosh, and I also sorted this the wrong way. It does pop up. Sorry, it's just taking a while. Higher than you'd expect, right? Its rank is 7, but it's second in TF-IDF weighting. And in fact, the only one that's beating it is, these are essentially kind of stop words.
Yeah.
the reason why you don't pull out, well, you can, but the reason why I didn't pull out stop words when doing bigrams is because it would enforce pairs that aren't there. So for example, imagine a sentence like, I am going to the bank. If you pulled out the stop words, it pulls out to and the. So you've got
Yeah.
going bank.
Going bank.
And, you know, and you could say, well, semantically, that's pretty close, but
Yeah.
those two words are not next to each other. And there could be cases where it's pulling out stop words that are meaningful. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
I like this, neither here nor there. I like going bank as a, you know, slang term for, you know, instead of getting paid or getting rich, I'm going bank.
well, let's try and make that happen.
Yeah, I think so. That's a spin-off project. Okay.
This is something Scott Graham was talking to us about is, you know, sometimes when you want to retain stop words or when you don't. And when I was doing it, it was just sort of like, if you pull out those stop words, you're enforcing patterns that aren't there. And I didn't want to necessarily do that. It's just easier to see the stop words and discount them as necessary, right? So will be.
Yeah. But, and again, given what we're doing, we don't yet know what, there's also a sense in which we don't know yet what some of the stop words might be. Like, someone might, but that bigram could potentially be interesting for us. The ways in which it's treating the, I don't know, maybe not, but
yeah. Anywho, so kind of forgot where we were, but that's the gist of what this is. We got the unigrams treating them flat, unigrams, bigrams, and trigrams, treating them as flat. And you'll notice when it's weighted, it's the same number. So we've got 6736 unigrams. That's going to be the same whether it's weighted or not, because we're talking about the same word.
right.
You know, it's that some of them are multiplied many times, right?
Right.
So,
it's the same number, but we can treat that number differently.
Yeah, right. Because it's just that some of those unigrams, when we're doing weighted, are getting multiplied 50, 60,000 times, but it's the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's there, just to sort of clarify why that's there. You got unigrams, you got bigrams, you got trigrams, and oddly, trigrams are some of them are kind of interesting. So, and they're stemmed, but like, you know, your cope mental health, because that's hyphenated.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting as a trigram. You know,
Yeah.
it surfaces these different things, right? This isn't shopping or surveys.
Yeah, a lot of those, because those all seem about your cope, mental health.
Yeah, I mean, we do see things like, okay, compensate, hit, minute, right?
That makes
hit,
sense.
Minute, survey, but then you see these things that get lost in the unigrams and bigrams that surface with trigrams about mental health. And their doc frequency, and again, this is measuring the frequency of that trigram. So the doc frequency, you can see, you know, unigrams, you're talking about doc frequencies in 8,000 area. For bigrams, it starts to drop off pretty quick because it's, you know, how many documents have that 2-word pairing, right?
Right.
Or at least that 2 stem, I'm sorry. And then trigrams, it drops off even a little bit further, although not as big a drop as you can see there. Oh, and I need to change that to go by rank. Yeah, but anyway, it's not like these mental health ones are a huge drop from the ones above them. So it's not like, you know, they're down into the 100.
Yeah, like the comps hit minute seems to be the outlier as opposed to the standard for this.
Yeah, these first 2, you know, that are 2,000.
Yeah, and
then these get a little bit closer.
Yeah.
In fact, down to here, really, you know.
Yeah.
So anywho, you know, it doesn't go beyond trigrams, but they are useful. I mean, it is kind of interesting that in the trigrams you get these weirdly human, in a sense, things that emerge, right, about mental health and coping strategies and that kind of stuff. So that's what this sheet is, and it collects all of these unigrams, unigrams weighted, bigrams, bigrams weighted. And when it says weighted there wasn't really what it really should say is like weighted by available hits.
Okay.
But, typing that out makes it huge. I don't want there to be confusion because, like TF-IDF is a weighting measure. When you talk about weighting with this stuff, usually that's the kind of stuff you're talking about.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Let me just make sure I didn't, yeah, let me do a sort here.
You start to get a sense of the computational rhetoric stuff, the number of decisions we could make within this data set and the number of different conclusions or implications that would emerge based on, which column we highlight.
Definitely. And I think, in fact, what we need to do is, now that we've got this, kind of go through these and just see what patterns pop up that are worth examining. Here on this notes page, I was already kind of putting some stuff that, we'd already been identifying as we went. So for example, I identified a couple of the interval periods where there are all those weird bot jobs. And this will be a segue. I jotted down about Hurricane Harvey because there was this, sort of weird sort of situated to event thing that kind of emerges and disseminate or distributes, I guess. And you don't get that in this aggregated data, right? This aggregated, not disaggregated, this aggregated data, because this is all of the stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
But I did go ahead and break this into then the component parts. So here, and this is posted on the thing, it's got a sample individual periods processed. So this is all the individual sample periods. And this breaks them into unigrams, trigrams, and bigrams. And the only reason why is if you collect all these together, the spreadsheet is too large for Google Docs to open.
Well,
it literally won't do it. It says too large. It says open a different spreadsheet. Like that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah.
I like that even though we're not really doing big data, we are already bumping up against some.
Yeah.
Not hugely, but it's already interesting to see how what people mean by big data.
Yeah, because even something, as we talked about, just running this, when I started doing the weighted by available hits, it was running into the literal trillions. When you talk about a matrix, because a matrix is looking at, well, it's essentially the probability of a word appearing in a document. And so it essentially has the term and then all of the documents, and then each term. So that's a matrix, a grid, right?
Okay.
And so if you're doing that on the kind of scale we were talking about, those things start to bump up into the trillions. And yeah, so I was getting these out of memory issues, even with, because we're talking about 23,000-ish, a little over that, for the observations. We have the rows, right?
Yeah.
And let me see, I can pull that up. And so that's not a ton of things.
Yeah.
But we're talking about text data. And the way ours works is it merges these two columns, title and description. That's another thing that potentially it could have been otherwise, Fanny Price. But it wasn't. We just decided to put these together. So
yeah,
that does, whatever. But it takes those.
It's just interesting if this sort of stepping back and more meta statement, right? That to make sense of this data, how much you have to add to it to make sense of it.
Yeah. Well,
whereas most people imagine that, when you unpack it, you're getting more. You're getting into something in a subtractive kind of way, but to actually make sense of this, you have to just keep adding. It gets bigger the more you try to make sense of it, not smaller.
Yeah, and it underscores how thoroughly rhetorical this is. I mean, you know, the choices you necessarily have to make,
Hmm.
you know, you know, it's less precise to say they shape what you're seeing. They constitute what you're seeing.
Yeah, no, I think that, and that I think is gets to our interest in cultural techniques, right? That's kind of the argument that those folks are making, is that this is not a kind of, the cultural techniques aren't like a lens through which a stable phenomenon is measured. It doesn't exist until, I mean, yeah, I mean, now we're getting into the stuff that will come up in that third piece, but you know,
Yeah.
right, if you do the, you know, if you want to, what's the Niels Bohr, you know, if you're looking at light, light's not this thing that you then look at two different ways. It's constituted by the technique you use to observe it.
Yeah. Well, and it, you know, potentially reaches back into the sort of Plato schism, right? Is it the case that there is a thing here, a form, right, a truth, and we're looking at it through different imperfect means?
Yeah.
Or is it the more sort of sophistic or rhetorical notion of probably there isn't an idealized truth
No,
here?
this is
One we're
what
constructing.
Casey talks about in his book is the sort of Plato's, I think it's hylomorphism, but basically the notion of form and content being distinct, right? That there's content out there that then takes a form. And the more rhetorical approach is that those aren't distinct. That informing it is, it's not a thing until it takes, you know, there's not content that then takes a form.
What was, so that's philo, as in like ph?
No, hylomorphism.
How do you know how to spell that?
HYLO.
And then morphism.
Yeah. Yeah, it's from Aristotle. That basically being is a compound of matter and form. And a lot of what I would think our perspective is going to be, you know, that's not how it breaks down.
Sorry, I'm just taking some notes.
In other words, right, there's not content out there about mechanical Turks that we're then giving a form. It isn't data until it's constituted as data.
Right.
Which is why, Joanna Drucker has a piece where she makes the case, particularly for digital humanities, to use the word capta as opposed to data.
Capta.
Yeah. Which basically is a nod to the fact that there's not data out there that we're collecting, but it's always being formed by the activity of collecting it.
Who is this?
Joanna, I think it's Joanna Drucker. She's got a piece about data visualization, and it's a caution against humanities people too quickly taking up data visualization methods from the sciences that oftentimes actively work to kind of sideline or erase all the work that went into collecting.
You're blowing up.
So she's thinking about data visualization methods that attend to the work of capturing the data.
Well, I jotted that down in our shared notes there. So anywho,
yeah,
that's kind of the gist of what we've got here. We've got the collected ones, and then here, these separate ones, as I mentioned, they're only broken into 3 spreadsheets because I have them as one, but because Google Docs couldn't, and that is kind of an interesting quirk, that it's like it could have it as a like Excel can have this as a document, but to share this, the mechanism of sharing, Google Docs was choking on it, you know, which like, well, so how do I share it? Do I just share it as an Excel file, or do I want to stick with the pattern we've been doing with having that data there in you know, you can actually access it online through Google Sheets.
Right.
So that's the choice, but it is kind of interesting that it wasn't so much the collecting, it was the sharing that made it choke. And this is what these sheets look like, and they're kind of similar. They've got unigrams and then unigrams. I wrote expanded, although really I should use the same terminology there and have weighted. Geez, it'd be easier to fix this one. But you can see like the columns are similar, and it's doing kind of the same thing where, so for, what is that, July 14th, we've got, it looks like 1688 unigrams for just that data, right? It's not the whole sample period, it's just this one. So you're going to have the same number of unigrams here because, again, it's the same stuff. It's just this one is multiplied by available hits.
Okay.
This one isn't. So that's this data right here, right? July 14th. So you've got the unigrams there. You've got the expanded or multiplied there, and you can see it shifts from survey to brand when it's done by available hits. And we can actually, take a look why. Where was brand? Let's see if we can actually even. So brand aliasing here, got some available hits there. It's some available hits there.
Mm-hmm.
Where's shoe comp? There. You can see its frequency, even though that was the top job. It's not collectively as high as brand, because I bet brand is coming up a lot of times.
Yeah.
Probably more than once too.
Yeah, brand. I bet some of these that have product even classify receipt.
Yeah, and see this one, it's mentioning brand quite a bit. So not only is this being multiplied by this, but here,
but also,
brand is in this write-up several times, right? Whereas shoe comp is only here once.
Yeah.
It kind of explains, why you see the things you see. But it might be useful, like, for example, if you poke around the aggregated data like this, you can start to see things like, boy, why is Hurricane Harvey popping up? And then, you can see, well, where is it talking about Hurricane Harvey? This is probably searching. Yeah, search all sheets. So it looks like here, so that's on August the 2nd. I mean, we can do things like take a look at the those things we see in the aggregated data and then determine, is Hurricane Harvey really something that was being talked about across the sample period? Or is it only something that pops up, for example, there once, August the 2nd?
Yeah. Now I like too that these ones the one we're looking at now can be useful to almost as a map for going back into the larger data set, or the data set can be used as a check, not a check, but what looks like might be huge on this list. If you go back into the large one, you realize that it might work there.
It's a way to cross-reference, right?
That's the word. Yeah, here we go.
If you're talking about, everyone's apparently talking about Hurricane Harvey, it's like, really? Or is it a few, is it a comparatively few number of posts? It is, because the doc frequency is low. And is it at a particular point in time, which it appears to be, right?
Yeah.
It helps us cross-reference, because if you're going to make larger claims about the data, you want to be able to discuss coherently anomalies. It doesn't mean they're not important, but it's like you wouldn't say, oh, everybody's talking about Hurricane Harvey. It's like, well, a few jobs were talking about it a lot at one point in time.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's up for us to do individually and collectively. is take these things and just start looking through and seeing what are interesting patterns, right?
Yeah.
And we've already identified some of these things like this, right? I mean, um, the unweighted 10th most frequent one is this weird, seemingly, gibberishy stuff that seems to be written for other bots.
Yeah. Buy bots, for bots.
Yeah.
Boo boo. No, is that? No, never mind. Trying to make a FUBU joke, but I realized that's not.
And weighted, it's even more, right? So I mean, there are things, just kind of to look through, and that this is speaking to the crux of our project. This is what the human is good at, right? The machine gives us this, but it's kind of up to the human to say, so what's interesting here?
Right. And I wonder if that's a fair amount of the actual. I wonder if that's a way of thinking about what if a lot of the hits we end up being interested in are somewhat like that. But the word interesting shifts. But essentially, what's interesting about this receipt? But they define interesting in particular ways. I don't know. Well, I lost that thread there.
Yeah, I mean, well, if we're trying to suss out, separations between human and non, that might be illuminating. Why are there so many jobs about, receipts?
Yeah.
Speak to us as consumers.
No, I mean, that made me think about, because we've Michael Richardson, who we've not talked to, but we've read some of his work, that he's got a piece called Drone Capitalism.
Yeah, that's come up. Yeah.
And looks at the ways in which, so, when brand and shop were popping up, those were some of the first things that jumped into my head when you were pulling up some of those sample, that if you look at it from one level, it looks like, oh, right, survey, that, we might be that makes sense that shows up. But then if you actually look, then, right, survey would show up if you looked at what the Turkers see. But if you then shift to the system and weight them as you've done, then it looks like shop and brand show up more. So whereas for instance, IRB, you're not a human unless you're at risk.
Yes, yeah.
For the Mechanical Turk, the most human thing you do is shop, or you're aware of brands, or yeah. I mean, that again, wildly speculative, but
no, but I mean, this is precisely, and see, this is interesting because our next step is moving toward categorization.
Yeah.
And particularly in terms of the data, it's using the same data, but doing things like topic models or clustering. So what that is, and we've talked about this before a little bit, but it's a way to take that language and ask the machine to put it into groups.
Yeah.
And things like topic models operate on the premise that each document, and what the machine is calling a document, is each post, right? Each document is a mixture of topics, and each topic is a mixture of terms, right? That's kind of the central premise of topic models. And as we talked about previously, for our purposes, that means topic models may or may not be the precise fit we want. I'm going to do it because it can still be interesting. But since we're dealing with short documents, right? We're talking about things that can be, 2 sentences.
Yeah, that's it.
These are closer to things like tweets. Right?
Yeah.
So a topic model may or may not be, I hedge to say best because that sort of presumes it's sort of like teleological, but that may be more precise when dealing with longer works like, a speech, because in that case, you're going to shift through a lot of different topics. In a situation like this, maybe you're not, maybe you're only talking about one topic. So there are other mechanisms to categorize. Clustering is one, and the presumption of clusters is much harder, where it doesn't see a doc as a mixture of topics. it sees it as belonging to a category. Right?
Yeah.
So clusters tend to be used. The sort of one of the sort of touchstone examples is if you were carrying 4 books and you cut all the pages out for whatever reason. Maybe you had to scan them, right? Whatever myth you want here. And you're carrying all those pages and you drop them. So now all the pages and all the 4 books are scattered all over. You could use clustering to say, oh, well, these pages all belong together and these, and theoretically, then you could reassemble the books.
Yeah.
Through the terms, right? So that's what it's not like one page is going to count in all 4 books. That's not how it would work, right? It's like, no, it belongs in Alice in Wonderland, not in, in an H.G. Wells book or whatever. So that's more how clustering works. So that's kind of the next step in terms of processing the data. But, as you're pointing out, I was kind of thinking of clustering in terms of what the Turker is doing, right? So reading a receipt versus taking a psychological survey. But there are lots of other ways to categorize, such as production and consumption, right? This stuff is talking about acts of consumption, shop, receipt, buy, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to categorize other than just here's what the Turker is here's the faculties the Turker is employing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, I like that. Because I think that was how I was thinking before, right? That what are earlier on we were discussing, I think even in previous episodes, right? Looking at verbs that get used. But potentially that might not be the best place or the only best place to focus is what are people being asked, what are humans being asked to do, but thinking about in what categories are humans being asked to weigh in. So it may not be that humans are really good at surveying. Humans are really good at surveying in a consumer context.
Yeah.
And so it adds a nice, that there aren't, which is really interesting, which makes sense. I mean, it's not surprising, right? That there aren't necessarily skills that are uniquely human. There's skills in particular contexts that are uniquely human. So humans are good at X may not be useful, but humans are good at X in Y might be a more supple way of getting at what Mechanical Turks is doing.
Yeah. I just jotted down because it reminded me of, in rhetoric history and the concept of things like taste.
Yeah.
Who was it? I think it's Hugh Blair.
Hume.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Well, and it's tied up with the Bell Let, but the idea of taste and where taste comes from and what taste is, that is a sort of rhetorical, at least historically, a rhetorical concept.
Yeah.
And kind of address this. I mean, humans are taste makers.
Yeah, but that makes it interesting, right? Anybody,
the metaphor of taste, as being a sensory data.
Well, and I mean, that gives us, Latour does, I mean, I still teach that Hume essay in part because what's really interesting about Hume, despite all of his other things you might use to critique him, what he's really trying to do in that standard of taste is he's trying to avoid the binary of objectivity and subjectivity.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to, basically taste is a relationship between the features of something and the capacity of something else to notice those.
Yeah.
So it's much more relational. I teach that Hume alongside some Latour stuff. Although in many ways, we also have that Latour essay, right? The Hume machine.
Yeah.
And Latour's got that piece in the 90s where he basically talks a little bit about, and he uses Hume to think about basically what we now call DH. Is it's just an association, right? Taste is you can understand taste as is an association. Which means we can't just look at verbs. We've got to, right? All mammals can feel, but if you want a mammal that feels something about a brand, you're going to need a human for that.
It's interesting because I'd be surprised if there were things like brand names in the data. I'd be interested because the
Uh,
way these things are written, it's, it tends to be things like, well, let's just take a look rather than me. So let's see, brand name survey,
yeah,
flick and tick collar and tick flea and tick collar survey, right? Because it's not going to mention the brand name.
right.
In in fact, because there may be sort of privacy issues, right? So a lot of times you don't see brand names, but
Yeah,
this notion of brand survey, right? Hmm. So anywho, gosh, and once again, what I thought was going to be short has taken us 50 minutes.
yeah,
So our next step, I think, is to look through this data and just start finding stuff. But these questions of categorization, because that's the next thing I'm going to be doing in terms of processing the data, is
yeah,
running topic models, running clustering. And I am going to need to talk to some folks about this because, once again, while I can do these things, I'm a lot fuzzier about issues of like, how is it doing it, right? So when you run a topic model, and there are a few different ways to do that, you have to do things like make choices in terms of the method it's using to associate things. And
right,
I can do those as long as you have absolutely no follow-up questions. But if you have
right.
follow-up, like, what is this doing? And
Yeah,
I'm a lot fuzzier on that kind of stuff, or why one is more apt for certain things than another.
yeah,
And just even the discussion we had about, well, why would a topic model be more or less appropriate here, given like we're using shorter documents, right? Right. I'm going to run them anyway, in part because our method is precisely that: is we want a range of stuff, even stuff that may not be canonically uh, perfectly suited to short documents, but I
right,
want to run them anyway. And the good news is I won't be running into those same kind of technological hurdles because doing this kind of categorization now, you're not doing it with data weighted by available hits, because there's no point to that. If what you're
right.
trying to do is categorize all these different jobs into groups, then you don't use more textual data. What you do is set the categories and you say, well, if you want the percentage that fall into this category, well, multiply this by this, right? And that constitutes this number.
Yeah,
Multiply these by this, and that constitutes that. So I won't have like the technical issues of running out of memory, because when you're classifying jobs, you're just classifying the job as such. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But yeah, I mean, I think now that we're getting some processed data,
yeah. We just need to spend some quality time with it.
yep, yeah, we both need to kind of look at it and just start identifying stuff. And we can potentially do that on this sheet that I've got pulled up here.
Okay,
We can just sort of like, hey, this is kind of interesting. Is this worth, talking about, and that kind of stuff.
okay. Do we want to? I'm wondering, just for the sake, do we need? So we've got this notes page. Do we want to be? Do we want? Essentially, should we start as another Google Doc that's just devoted to this?
Yeah, we could. So it doesn't get
Also,
lost
just,
in here.
yeah, and if people want to jump in and see it, they can then go right to the good stuff.
Sure.
I mean, this is all good stuff too, but I'm wondering, just think about ways of,
Just organizational.
yeah, I'm even wondering if it should be a Google Sheet even. Well, I think a Google Doc works.
It would kind of hinge on if the things would need columns, right? If
Yeah,
they would
probably
have
not.
other data aspects.
I think we can just loosely note what's because I was even thinking I'm playing like looking for things that are interesting, looking for things that are useful, looking for things that are challenge. Like we don't necessarily need tight categories like that, but
No.
some way of like even, yeah, never. I'm probably overthinking it now, but like,
Well, let's just start with a page.
yeah,
And then if we need to start collecting things into groups, I mean, we can always do it later. It's, it's
yeah,
just slightly more labor.
yeah. No, I think just a plain old Google Doc will get the job done. Okay.
That I think is the next thing is, and you can see this, right? Because I'm sharing my screen, right?
Yeah.
So these kinds of categorizations, because once we have things in categories, what that opens the door to is all those other data facets that we haven't looked at other than text. So things like the rewards you get. If we can categorize things, then we can do things like, so what's the average reward for this category versus
Right.
that category? And is that illuminating, right? Do you get
Yeah,
paid
yeah, yeah.
more for using this versus that or whatever? Duration. So, what's the average time allotted for this? And it
So
allows us to,
once we've got some categories, we can then do even additional things with those categories. Then
we can then rope in that other data. Then there are some other things that might be worthwhile. Things like there are some interesting network graphs you can do where it does things like it links terms together by probability and puts them into kind of like a tree looking network where, this term is strongly linked to this. And then the probability is it either shoots to this as a third term or this as a third. They're just interesting.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
And it visualizes them. So I might poke around with that. The only caveat is, the method is that it's using tidy text, and I'm more familiar with Quantita. These are just R package. They're packages in R, but they're also ways to conceptualize data.
Okay.
So it's more than just the thing. It's a way to approach data structures, and I know them both a little bit, but I'm more familiar with one rather than the other. But anywho, that's that. The other thing is the B pool, which we haven't even looked at that much at all. But again, this speaks to categorization, because what you're getting in the B pool that you're not getting in the A pool is feedback data from Turkers.
That's right.
You're getting, Turker ratings of fairness, in terms of compensation, but also like how quickly do they respond. So this again is sort of more appropriate when we start doing things like, can we put those jobs into categories, and then we'd have information about Turker sentiment.
Okay. Whew.
There's also stuff like sentiment analysis. I'm on the fence about this. I mean, I could run it, but sentiment analysis, that's a thing in text mining where there are actual dictionaries that have been compiled by other researchers of words, and then they've weighted or they've assigned those words sentiment. And that can be as sort of binary as positive, negative. And so like hope would be one
right.
positive,
Uh-huh.
would be one negative. And you can actually map to those and then get scores. Then there are other dictionaries that are a little more fine grained with, like is strongly positive and hate is strongly negative, and then there are ranges. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
What's that?
That makes sense that you have, that even within those, you'd want additional gradation, I guess.
Those dictionaries are, think of it this way. I mean, it's like, what's the numerical weighting of, love versus hate? How do you come, you know what I mean? I mean, it's like the way that those were built.
Yeah, you tell me.
Interested,
yeah.
Not that that's a flaw. I mean,
no, I mean, how else would you?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you avoid that? But, there are, because of that sentiment analysis, I mean, it just has those kinds of caveats where, what dictionary are you picking? And then for our data, there is sort of I'm not certain it'll show anything that interesting.
Right.
But, it also, it's not like it would be hard to run it. It's just,
Yeah, I'm not sure
I'm
what
not
it
sure,
would.
I'm not sure what
Yeah,
a score of, it's a 3.4 in, in positivity. It's like, well,
yeah. And I wonder yeah. I mean, who knows? At this point, it doesn't seem to be like it would get us much or get us much that we could then do something with.
yeah, I mean, I was thinking, it's like potentially if we can categorize stuff, it's like, well, the sentiment language in this category is this number, and in this category, it's that number. I'm not sure
Yeah,
what to do with that. I mean, one place where this kind of stuff tends to be really useful is like customer feedback.
yeah.
Is,
So I mean, so potentially in the B pool, we might be more likely to use in the.
but see, those
Well,
aren't recursive.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
It's just a numerical, it's a de facto numerical ranking of how fair is this, but
Yeah.
it's not like you're getting blurbs. I mean, where sentiment analysis tends to be used is stuff like customer feedback, those surveys you get where they're like, rate us on a 1 to 10 and tell us why you gave us that, and you write, well, I had a great experience, or this was terrible because I called up and you did the. And so what happens is you can, in a batch way, take
Right.
all those and say, oh, well, those who gave us a 5 used this language, and those who gave us a 10 used this. So it has its use, but it tends to be stuff like that, like discursive feedback.
Yeah.
Now, hit descriptions, I suspect they're shooting for neutrality. So I'm not sure what you'll see in terms of sentiment, because it's trying to describe, take this survey or identify if there's a dog here. I'm not sure what we're going to get in terms of sentiment. That said, I can run it. I'm just not sure if it's going to be useful or not.
Yeah.
But, I also don't want to um, spin off into the ether of there's a billion things you could do.
Right. Right.
Text data, and I don't want to just keep spinning and spinning. So I'm trying to kind of make a concrete movement from, dealing with the frequency data, which we now have. I don't want to do any more of that. Then moving on to categorization, and then potentially some of these other things like word embeddings,
Yeah.
network graphs.
At this point, we're really on the categorization.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be doing that with, things like clustering and topic modeling, but it's also something we can look at the frequency data and start, seeing things there. I mean, as you point out, the way that the topic models and the clusters group things together may be different than things like the difference between production and consumption.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, but I think we're moving now into categorizing stuff. And in fact, I mean, what these things do, and we'll probably wrap things up here, is they'll give you tell it, you give it its you give it its number of categories, and it'll do it for you. It's like, hey, I want to take all this text data and group these documents into 5 categories for me. And it's like, all right, I'll do it.
Right. 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 You're the boss.
And then it'll give you the terms. Like if you do a topic model, it'll say, well, here are the terms that are indicative of this topic, this category. But I don't know what that means. It's up to us as humans, I guess, to look at it and say, all right, well, here's the top 10, 20 terms that are associated with that topic. What is that topic maybe talking about?
Right.
In fact, that's something that even people other than you and me could do, right? Here are the top 5 terms associated with these 4 categories. What do you think this category is? If this is the language that it's
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What would you call that?
Yeah.
That's something.
Which is in itself a human intelligence test potentially.
Well, that's, we wouldn't want to post it in this product, but yeah, I mean, theoretically, this is something that is posted on Mechanical Turk.
Yeah.
It is used in research. So, I mean, that would be a job. It's like, given these 10 terms, what's an overarching concept that, unites them? Or other things like, sometimes in research, you'll do things like, here are 10 terms, identify the one that doesn't match.
Yeah.
What's the outlier? And that helps you understand if your categories are sound. Because if people can routinely pick out the ones that don't belong, it's like, okay, these are coherent categories.
Yeah.
If people are picking out everything, it's like, okay, this category is meaningless.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh boy.
It's not like we have to do all this stuff. It's just
No, but I mean, I think it's good to know, particularly too, if we're thinking about, we discussed things like peer review and rigor and stuff like that,
Yeah.
even if we don't do these things, we've got we didn't do them because we didn't know about them. We did them because we thought this about them and decided not to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I
think it's useful to consider them even if we don't do them, because considering them is itself a part of the process, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it wouldn't be a big deal to, if I run some of these kinds of things and get some terms, it'd be no big deal to just target some folks, or, even just a grad class or something, and say, hey, given these terms, what do you think individually is the outlier here? Or what would you call this category if you had to give it a name or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, that's a means to vet.
Yeah.
Anywho, so that's what we're doing now. Yeah, we're out of time. So I think what we need to do now is just start playing with the data, just start looking at the data. If we want to ask other people to take a look, I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go ahead and move forward with using some of these processing means to try and categorize stuff.
Yeah, no, I can put up a call on Twitter to see if anybody wants to take us up on it.
Yeah. The only quirk is it's not super self-explanatory. I mean, it takes a couple minutes to sort of walk people through,
Sure.
raw data, here's collected, here it is in these sheets and whatever. Sort of just, an overview of what you're seeing when you look at it. Okay, let's see here. I need to pull up. That's not what I want. Huh. How do I show that? Sorry, I'm fumbling with the controls for something here. No. Well, whatever. I mean, we're done. All right, so that's the gist of that. Anything else?
Okay. No, I think I'm just going to start messing with it, just looking at the data to see what comes up.
Yep, I will too. And let's see, 2 weeks from now is what, the 16th?
That sounds right.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get our hands in the data and then we'll chat again.
Okay.
All right.
Happy New Year.
You too. Sorry, I kind of spaced. All right.
Okay.